First of all, I want to talk about what science is. To be very brief, science is a mode of knowledge. And we cannot deny the unparalleled contributions that science has made to our life. There are so many facilities. Science has improved our quality of life in various domains, especially in medicine and in various other things. I need not talk about that. But, and this B-U-T, but is very important because this is what we're going to talk about as to where science has gone wrong. And I want to talk about degeneration of science into scientism. The word scientific as such doesn't have any negative connotations. Scientific is a positive word, and science is a very organized and systematic way of acquiring knowledge using external senses, experimentation, and reason. But the problem arises when unity of knowledge is replaced by fragmentation of knowledge, and the spheres of science, morals, and art, they disintegrate, separate into totally separate, exclusive, alienated spheres. And in 16th century, natural sciences became scientism because it was given out that science is the only mode of knowledge. It is the only way of acquiring reality, and the only reality is one that is perceived, that is registered through senses, external senses, empiricism, positivism, and rationalism. So natural science became scientism. And this was the beginning of, you see, degeneration of science into scientism, as one of the most famous educationists and scholars, Nasser, says, that this was the beginning of the Luciferan thrust for acquisition of facts only, information only. Knowledge was quantified, measured in terms of quantity only, and divorced from the twin sources of knowledge, that is revelation and intellection. So this was divorce of metaphysics from science that pervaded all the other spheres of life: economics, art, literature, sociology, anthropology, everything. And science, and allow me to use this word, scientism, it had its glory in that sense of triumph, sense of power that it exercised over environment and human beings. And its application was technology, and its motives were economic, monetary interests. So the worldview that emerged from this exclusive reliance on science as the only way of understanding reality and truth, it promoted materialism. And materialism became the religion of Western civilization. And this was, you see, this empiricism and positivism, they were no more regarded as just procedures whereby knowledge is acquired. They acquired the status of a philosophical stance, a worldview, a way of life from which God was banished, from which heaven was banished, from which the idea of sacred was banished, because these are all abstractions which cannot be verified through experimentation or external senses. So we see the reductive effect of this desacralized knowledge. I'm calling it desacralized because it was divorced, as I've said before, it was divorced from the twin sources of knowledge which had acclaimed validity in the medieval ages: revelation and intuition. So all the scriptures, they were looked down upon, they were dismissed as slipshod work of illiterate people. And knowledge, it was reduced to the collection of facts only, information only. And this is what we can see today, that we are bombarded. This is the influence of scientism, that we are bombarded with information. This is information only. This is not wisdom. This is not spiritual consciousness. This is not the realization of the elevated, noble states of consciousness. But what is important is the purpose and meaning of life. That is the most important thing. And this was abolished. This important concept that human beings, they were created in the image of Almighty Allah, a creator. This view was dismissed, and this is a view that gives purpose and meaning to life. So life, it was emptied of purpose, a noble purpose, and a noble meaning of life. Life was reduced to materialism only. Everything was pursued in terms of material interests, material benefits. And the result was that the moral values, ethics, which are the essential ingredient features of a civilization, a society, communal order, communal collective benefit, they were coarsened. They were reduced because moral values ceased to be abiding. Moral values were no longer looked upon as emanating from scriptures, from holy traditions, from prophets, from avatars, from shamans. Rather, moral values were seen to be determined by changing socio-economic, political conditions. So moral values became relative, they became conditional, and they came to be determined by, again, personal interests. So humanism, that became, you see, one of the watchwords in the Western culture, that reduced moral values to the parameter of human beings only, forgetting that human beings, they have a higher self and they have a lower self. And the higher self has to be nurtured. The lower self has to be controlled, has to be disciplined. But this view of moral values, this was not allowed. This was not recognized in the worldview that was promoted by scientism. And human beings, again, because you see the soul cannot be seen. So it was given out that human beings, they don't have a soul because soul cannot be looked through the lens. So soul was, again, you see, it was dismissed, contemptuously rejected as an illusion only. Now, another myth, I am using this word objectivist myth, that was generated and propagated by science, was that science, only science, is capable of establishing objectivity of facts. But what science forgot was that science is value-free. It cannot tell right from wrong. It cannot differentiate righteous anger, that is indignation, from anger. It cannot give us a definition of piety, virtue, nobility, sanctity. It cannot tell us anything about spiritual experience and the need to have a loving dialogue with God. So this was one of the major inadequacies of a scientific view of world. I'm not saying scientific revolution, but scientific view of world, that it gave us a worldview in which there was no warmth, no humanity, there was only formulas. You can calculate 2 + 2 = 4, so it is acceptable. But because you cannot see the beauty of God, the Jamal of God, so that was again rejected. And this scientism reduced everything. Reality, the only reality was that you can see through your senses. Truth, the only truth which can be tested. And again, it presented a very reductive view of human nature. It proposed a materialist, selfish model of human. So there were two, you see, offshoots of modernity. Naturalism, In 18th century, that is Enlightenment. That is the period that is called Enlightenment, so-called Enlightenment. Because essentially it was, you see, delving deep into darkness. Because the more we move away from celestial source of knowledge, the more our consciousness is darkened by scientific superstitions. So in 18th century, naturalism was an offshoot of science, and naturalism is the belief that reality is what you see through your senses, so it was reduced to observable phenomena registered through external sciences. And nominalism, this was another offshoot, that abstractions, for instance, heaven, soul, goodness, piety, virtue, sacrifice, altruism, justice, kindness, compassion, all these things that exist outside time and space, they are creations of human mind. They are creations of human language. They do not pre-exist. They are not universal realities. Rather, they are fabricated. This was the view. And this is a very, very reductive view of reality and truth. So I will move on to reductive view of human nature. If we look at Hobbes, the philosopher who said that human life is nasty, it is short, it is brutal. It is a very cynical and pessimistic view of human nature. So we can see that science pervaded all these domains: biology, economics, psychology, anthropology, literature. Then we have Adam Smith and Malthus, the economists, who said that people who are poor, they do not have any right to live because they're not contributing to the material prosperity of society, so let them die. So this is a very selfish and materialistic model of human nature. Very cynical view, very pessimistic. And then Darwin, he admitted, in biology, he admitted that Malthus and Smith's theories, they, helped him to develop that ruthless, biological, individualistic, adaptive model of the survival of the fittest. And so much so that in 19th century, there was an English philosopher, James Stuart Mill, bred, raised on utilitarian theories. He found himself on the verge of committing suicide. Just at the very tender age of 22, his father, James Mill, was a philosopher. And what rescued him was Wordsworth's poetry, because Wordsworth is a poet who talks about a spirit that pervades all the phenomenon of life, a spirit that cannot be registered through senses. So this is how he was rescued, by a belief in a spirit that is independent of time, that is independent of space, that pervades the life all around us. And then you have Freud, who wrote in Totem and Taboo that God is just a figment of imagination, and that there is no difference between a neurotic and a saint, because they're just like savages. They grovel very humiliatingly before God, who doesn't have any reality, but who has been created by human imagination. And Freud said that we have projected our subjectivity onto the objective. So this is how you see these people, they undermined the very basis of human civilization, the very, very reason for the existence of human life, that we were created in the best of stature, Asunul Taqweem, the crown of creation. So that crown of creation, he was reduced to a neurotic only. Similarly, Marx, he said that human nature can be understood only in terms of struggle for bread and butter. And Freud, he said that the only thing to make us understand human nature is the power of libido. So these are all very, very reductive views of human nature, and they degenerated a very cynical, pessimistic view of human nature. Corroding, I'm repeating, undermining human values, human relationships, family systems, civilization. And when we come to language, we find that in all the religions, primitive as well as the wisdom traditions, there is a theory of the divine origin of language, and the belief that language functions to connect with God. We have the scriptures. Language acts as a bond, as a bridge. It is a source of strength. It is compared to Hazrat Khizr. And especially if we read Sufi literature, Sufi poetry elevates. It helps us out of that lower state and takes us up to the higher spiritual realms. It is emotionally and morally also ennobling and uplifting. And it is evidenced in mystical literature, not only of Muslim mystical traditions, but in all the mystical traditions all across the world. And aesthetic dimension, again, aesthetics is a form of dignity and sacred. If we look at the Qiraat Sharif of Holy Quran, again, the ecstasy that it moves you into, that is a form of dignity and sacred. But what science did was it, again, reduced the very concept of aesthetics to mere cosmetic appearances. So these are all reductive views of language, and the negative impact that it had on human life was that Western languages, they came to be divested of their evocative, symbolic, and multi-dimensional power. They became more unidimensional because this monological, totalitarian view of life, it was reflected in the it language. In fact, there were philosophers and scientists and mathematicians who tried to write another language based on mathematics. And Hobbes and Locke, they said that language should be freed from all, abstract words, all the adjectives, all the adverbs, so that it can be made more and more accurate and more precise. But this, and language, as we have seen, language is a form of connection with the God. So if we look at language as simply a system of signs in which the meaning is not fixed, again, because language determines our worldview is reduced to a very, very myopic world. As the famous philosopher Wittgenstein, he said that the end of my world, the limit of my world is the limit of my language. And we can see that all the value systems, they were coarsened. And this happened because of the arrogant stance of scientism. So the sense of purpose, faith, idealism, religion, all these words, these values that I have mentioned here, they were dismissed as nothingness. It was said, as Marx said, that religion is the opium of masses. Idealism, it was said that it is just a flattering word for hypocrisy. It was said that there is no such thing as compassion. There is no such thing as sacrifice. This does away with the falsafa of shahadat. Falsafa shahadat, khatam ho jata hai. Because if you read modern literature, you will find that, people who went out to the war, they are compared to animals butchered. So all these values, they are coarsened. And we begin to lose our faith in all these values because they are looked upon as simply flattering, hypocritical words to mask, to cloak, to cover monetary, personal motives. So the only motive that remains is a sense of power, a sense of power that is derived from acquiring money, that is derived from exercising power over others. So the beautiful concepts of piety, they are again rejected. They're explained in terms of very petty and very ugly things. And you can see these things, you see, in terms of, and you can see it in literature, that in modern literature, in postmodern literature, in Western world especially, the heroes are no longer those exalted figures that we find in classical literature of Western Europe. The heroes in postmodern literature, they are pygmies, they're perverts, they're criminals, they're degenerate people. And the only focus is on the ugly realities of life. So this is a very myopic view of life. And as you see, I've written this word conscience. If we read Nietzsche, he said, get rid of conscience, get rid of compassion, get rid of sacrifice, climb over the corpses, make more money, exercise power. And real happiness, again, the very concept of happiness has changed. It is no more contentment. It is no more spiritual satisfaction or spiritual elevation that we derive from doing our duties towards the ultimate reality. Happiness is now, you see, measured in terms of immediate gratification of senses. So the only, you see, reward system is that of pleasure and pain, but personal, individual pleasure of one person can be acquired at the cost of other people's happiness. And pain, when you see a Marde-Mujahid, he goes out in the battlefield, he's ready to undergo ordeal, agony, pain, he's ready to lay down his life. But this is not accepted in this modern worldview, and pain, it is, you see, it is rejected. So the concept of happiness is reduced to mere titillation of sensations, and the only rewards, they are reduced to sex and money, and not to reward in the hereafter. This is how, you see, scientism has reduced every sphere of life. It has pervaded and influenced every sphere of life. Thank you very much. With this, I will end, and if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
I think in general, science does not deny the existence of reality or truth. It has just furnished us new ways of verifying and testing truth. And one cannot eliminate truth or reality or any disciplines related with the discussion of these subjects if they have a relevance and if they have usefulness and utility. And rather than lamenting and lambasting on the other ideas, we should focus on the relevance of these subjects.
Thank you very much for your observation. I fully agree with you. As I've said before, that science as itself is in no way contradiction with especially the Muslim perspective. Science and metaphysics can coexist. That's why I use the word scientism. That is an exclusive focus on just one mode, one way of acquiring knowledge. There are other ways of acquiring knowledge, and if you read Sufi literature, Sufis have said, Shah-e Aql aakar samjhaya karo, Aql-e Salim. And this Aql-e Salim and Shah-e Aql, you know, they were accepted as valid sources of knowledge even in the Western world before 16th century. What I'm saying is that science has excluded these modes of acquiring knowledge, about another way of life, another domain. This is what I have said. I'm not saying that science is in any way opposed to moral values or to the Muslim perspective.
Is there any solution? Are we doing something to regain the lost, values? And what are you seeing in future that can we be able to regain all these, values which are sacred for us, which are, very respectable for us?
Definitely, I'm very, very optimistic. I think the very objective of this gathering today is to synthesize the polarities, because there is no clash as such, and because human beings, they're imprinted by the divine. They're programmed to, reach out to the divine. So this can in no way be erased. So I believe that one day scientists will be able to understand. Already you see in the subjective physics, they've already come to see that there are, the subjective element in physics has come to see that there are different realities and truths which they have failed to understand and decipher. And as Shakespeare in the 16th century, he said that there is much more in heaven than is dreamt of in your philosophy. I mean, this is, what has science done so far? It hasn't covered much. Science has still a long way to go. And scientists, they will one day, through scientific modes of inquiry, they will reach out to God. I believe that.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम जी तनवीर है और कायद-ए-आज़म यूनिवर्सिटी से आई हूँ। डॉक्टर साहब, बहुत आपका शुक्रिया, बहुत आपने इन्फॉर्मेटिव और एनलाइटनिंग जो है वो आज टॉक दी। मेरा छोटा सा सवाल ये है कि यूरोप ने अगर वेस्ट में अगर नॉलेज को डीसेक्युलराइज किया तो उसके पीछे तो तकरीबन 1200 साल की यूरोपी तारीख़ थी, जिनको हम डार्क एजेस के नाम से याद करते हैं, जब 4th सेंचुरी AD में सेंट ऑगस्टाइन ने नॉलेज को सेक्रेड सेक्युलर डिवाइड उसको दी, और सर्टन जो 1000 साल तक जो फिर यूरोप में जो नॉलेज प्रोड्यूस हुई वो प्राइमरीली सेक्रेड नॉलेज थी, जिसमें क्रिश्चियन थियोलॉजी पे सारा फोकस था और नेचुरल साइंसेस को बिल्कुल उन्होंने इग्नोर कर दिया था। मेरा सवाल ये है कि मुसलमानों को क्या हुआ कि जो मुस्लिम हमारी तहजीब है, इसका तो जब आगाज़ होता है तो हम देखते हैं कि सेक्रेड सेक्युलर नॉलेज की कोई तफरीक नहीं थी और एक इंटीग्रेटिव व्यू ऑफ नॉलेज था, और पूरे के पूरे नॉलेज को सेक्रेड नॉलेज समझा जाता था, उसमें कोई तफरीक नहीं थी। और ये क्या हुआ कि मुस्लिम तहजीब का जब हम देखते हैं कि ज़वाल आया तो यूरोप का वही आइडिया हमने बोरो कर लिया, इसके पीछे क्या मुहर्रकात थे? क्या आप काइंडली इस पर थोड़ी सी रोशनी जो है वो डाल सकेंगी?
Thank you for your question. It's a very complex question. I think to begin with is the Muslims, when they were at the peak of their civilization and when Europe was sunk in darkness, the so-called dark ages, I mean, they cannot be applied to the Muslim period, because you see they were at the height of their glory, and the pavements in Cordoba, they were well lit, and the libraries, they were full of books. But unfortunately, there came a decline in Muslim civilization. And they forgot to draw upon the only source of guidance, the Holy Quran. I think that is the major reason of the downfall of Muslims and their failure to keep that integrated knowledge intact. Because once you see we became servile to Western technological advancement, we stopped studying science in a scientific way. We started imitating them slavishly. We are still studying the course designs, the course outlines, which were a long time designed in the Western universities. I was recently studying that according to a survey, and this survey was conducted 10 years back, in all the madaris of Pakistan, when they surveyed how Aima can study Holy Quran के कैसे वो किरात करते हैं, तो उन्होंने देखा कि 90% जो आइमा हैं, जो इन मदारिस से सर्टिफिकेट्स लेकर आए हैं, वो कुरान शरीफ सही उसकी अदायगी नहीं कर सकते थे। तो इसकी मैं समझती हूँ कि मेन जो वजह है कि हमने हमने सहलंगार हो गए और हमने स्लेविश मेंटालिटी को अडॉप्ट कर लिया, अपने जहन के दरीचे बंद कर लिए, और जो हमें जो एक रहनुमाई दी गई थी उसको भूलकर अब आप देखें कि मेरी अपनी जो एजुकेशन है वो शुरू में आई स्टडीड ऑल द वेस्टर्न स्कॉलर्स। मुस्लिम स्कॉलर्स को तो मैंने बहुत बाद में पढ़ा है, क्योंकि स्कूल में, कॉलेज में आई वाज टॉट वेस्टर्न हिस्ट्री, आई वाज टॉट वेस्टर्न फिलॉसफी, आई वाज टॉट वेस्टर्न लिटरेचर। आई डिडंट नो अबाउट सूफी लिटरेचर। I read it at a very, very long time, क्योंकि जिन अदारों में मैंने तालीम हासिल की, वहाँ कभी मिस्टिसिज्म की बात नहीं हुई थी, वहाँ कभी इस्लाम की बात नहीं हुई थी, वहाँ कभी कुरान शरीफ की बात नहीं हुई थी, वहाँ पर कभी ये सवाल नहीं उठाए गए थे. आज भी ये देखें कि हमारे बहुत सी तालीमी जो दर्सगाहें हैं, हम वहाँ क्या पढ़ा रहे हैं, कभी किसी ने ये सवाल नहीं उठाया है. हम गलत तालीम दे रहे हैं, हम तरबियत भी गलत दे रहे हैं. तो ये हमारा फ़र्ज़ है कि हम ये सवाल उठाएं, जैसे कि साहिबजादा साहब ने फरमाया, टू क्वेश्चन द क्वेश्चंस, to raise questions and to answer questions. So we have to de-learn a lot of things that we have, you see, acquired from the Western civilization. We don't have to be impressed by them. We don't have to take them as our role models. और जो सेकंड सेशन है आज की, ये जो हमारी सारा दिन का वो जो डिस्कशंस है, that is going to focus on Muslim philosophers and scholars whom we have forgotten. भूल गए हैं हम. As Huston Smith says, I mean, the title of one of his books is The Forgotten Truth. So this especially applies to the Muslim, that we have, you see, forgotten these abiding, permanent, absolute, universal truths and replaced them with knowledge taken blindfoldly from the West. Thank you. Any other question? Thank you so much.